Chapter 17, Windcatcher. Tony opened his eyes to a sky of waning gray light. Whether it was the thick fog, the coming of a storm, perhaps he had slept longer than he meant to. Whatever it was, the day was dimmer than when he had fallen asleep, and he was very hungry. He looked at his watch. It had gone blank. It was ruined, he figured, by water. Ruefully, he realized that they should have gotten a waterproof watch, not just one that was water resistant. Then, when he reached for his compass, he discovered it was gone. He must have lost it swimming. Gradually, Tony began to realize that not only didn't he know the time, he had not the slightest idea where he was. He did not even know in which direction was home. Tony stood up and looked about. Though the island he was on appeared to be bigger than Hoghead, it was the same in other respects. A rocky shore surrounded an inland thick with clumps of stunted trees. The thought even occurred to him that perhaps it was Money Island. Not knowing what else to do, but reminding himself of his plan to swim from island to island, Tony began to walk along the shore. As he walked, he kept his eyes to the water. His hope was that he'd get to see another nearby island. But after a half hour of walking, he had not seen another island, not one clue to suggest where he was. He kept telling himself it was because the fog was thick. There was nothing to do but keep walking. He had reached a dead end, a dark, flat spit of sand broken by tufts of stiff eelgrass. Water lapped the shore on three sides. Then, for just a moment, the fog lifted. Tony saw what appeared to be another island. What he could make of it, which wasn't much, suggested an island that was even smaller than Hoghead. But not only was it impossible to tell its size, it was hard for Tony to judge clearly how far away it was. Reluctantly, he decided it would be a mistake to swim for it, unless he knew exactly where he was going. He realized he had been lucky before. As if nature itself agreed, the misty island seemed to melt away, swallowed whole by the fog. Tony looked around where he stood. The spit of land, he decided, was a lot like the place where he and Grandma had dug for clams. Just the thought of it reminded him of his hunger. He wished he had eaten his lunch. He had left it on the Snark. On hands and knees, he began to scoop out sand. Within moments, he found 5 clams. After washing them at the water's edge, he cracked them one against the other, then pulled out the flesh, only to stop. Could he actually eat this stuff? Raw? He sniffed at one. Fishy. He stuck out his tongue and tasted of it. Not bad, he had to admit. As if to remind him of his hunger, his stomach growled. Tony nibbled the clam. It tasted good. He began to eat greedily. Once, having eaten, Tony felt much better, with energy considerably restored. He came off the spit and continued to explore the water's edge. It was a wildly irregular shore along which he was moving, with countless inlets and small lagoons. Big boulders made it difficult to walk, and increasingly, Tony had the feeling that the lowering sky was closing down on him, locking him in. It was getting damper, too. At first, he thought it was just the fog becoming thicker, but it didn't take long for him to wonder if, in fact, night was coming on. Perhaps after his hard swim across the channel, he had slept a lot longer than he thought. Although he was getting nowhere, Tony preferred moving about to sitting and waiting for something to happen. Now and again, he climbed a rock and turned complete circles on its top in search of anything that might help. He saw nothing. Discouraged, Tony sat with his back against one of the big rocks. Save for the soft slap of waves upon the shore and the occasional cranky squawk of an invisible gull high above, it was eerily quiet. It was as if he were some kind of Robinson Crusoe on a faraway island. The thought gave him an odd feeling. He reminded himself that though it didn't feel like it, he really was quite close to the mainland and home. The more he thought of it, the more the idea of spending a night on the island troubled Tony. That couple knew he was there, but maybe they just assumed he'd be able to get back on his own. After all, they apparently had nothing to do with the Snark floating away. He doubted then that they would tell anyone what had happened. That meant Grandma wouldn't know anything. She must be terribly upset that he had not gotten back. She might be thinking he had drowned. Tony could almost sense her despair. Still, there wasn't much he could do except wait until the fog lifted. Once it did, he would be at least able to get his sense of direction. But that, he reminded himself, might not happen until the morning. If then, feeling terrible about the mess he placed himself in, he got up and started to walk again. There never seemed to be anything worth looking at. Between the growing dark and the fog, it all seemed hopeless. But it was while rambling aimlessly that he came upon the Snark. He had not even been looking for her. All the same, she was just there. Her bow stuck precariously between some large boulders at the shore. Tony stood there, too surprised to do anything but stare at the sailboat. His first thought was that he was imagining her. But when he realized it was the Snark, his heart gave an extra beat. With as much joy as if he had found a long-lost friend, he rushed forward. He felt like hugging the boat. How did it come back? All he could guess was that the complex currents that swirled around the islands, the ones that had tossed him about, had apparently brought her to that spot. And nothing he knew but blind luck had brought them back together. Ravenously, he ate the fruit he'd left in the boat, and in a few short gulps, he swallowed his remaining water. Tony checked the boat carefully, trying to see if anything had been lost or broken. Everything appeared to be intact. Nothing gone, nothing broken. Certain the boat was in good shape, Tony did not have the smallest doubt in his mind about what he wanted to do. He would sail home. Life jacket snugly on, he completed a hasty double check to make sure everything was set. All he had to do was decide which direction to go. That held him. He had no idea which direction was the right one. For all he knew, he was facing the Sound. Long Island Sound was 12 miles wide. And what, he suddenly asked himself, what if he inadvertently sailed toward the ocean? Or worse, into it? Against that awful idea was the unpleasant thought of staying where he was, of spending the night there. He didn't want to do it, though he could almost hear his grandma and Chris insisting that was the thing to do. It was not long before his own cautious conscience joined the chorus of concern. Don't sail. Yet, at the same time, he was telling himself that since he had put himself into this mess, it was his responsibility to get out of it. Frustrated, Tony stared out into the still dark fog. More than anything, he wanted to go, if only to show everybody he could handle himself. Anyway, he told himself it wasn't really night yet. He should be able to get home before it got seriously dark, before Grandma got more worried than he guessed she was. With a sudden impulsive move, Tony shoved the Snark out into the water, jumped in, grasped the sheet with one hand, and put his other hand to the tiller. For a moment, the Snark seemed to be reluctant, even to tremble. Then, very slowly, Tony began to sail away from the island.